My name is Max, and I want to take you to a specific moment on television. August 9th, 1965, a press conference in Singapore. A 42-year-old man named Lee Kuan Yew is sitting in front of cameras and microphones. He looks like he has not slept in days. He begins to speak, and within a few sentences, he stops. He is openly weeping on live television. What had happened was that Singapore had just been expelled from Malaysia, not voluntarily, kicked out, told to leave. It meant no natural resources of any kind, no oil, no minerals, no agricultural land to feed its population, no reliable water supply. The country that had expelled them controlled the tap. No military, no army, no navy, no air force, a tiny island nation with no way to defend itself, surrounded by larger neighbors, with complicated feelings about its existence. The British bases represented about 20% of Singapore's economy. They were leaving. 5 problems, each one individually capable of ending a country, all 5 arriving simultaneously on the same day. Lee Kuan Yew had exactly one asset: the people on the island. About 2 million of them in 1965. No resources, no allies, no army, no water, and no obvious reason to believe this city-state had any future at all. Subscribe right now, because the story of what Lee Kuan Yew did next is one of the most extraordinary sequences of decisions in the history of any government. Problem 1 was water. Lee invested immediately in maximizing reservoir capacity. He launched water recycling programs. He negotiated long-term water agreements with Malaysia while simultaneously reducing dependence on them. Today, Singapore has 4 national taps: local catchment, imported water, desalination, and reclaimed water. 50 years of work on a problem that could have ended the country in its first year. Problem 2 was the economy. Lee made a decision that was genuinely radical. He chose not to nationalize industry. He went the opposite direction. He made Singapore the most open and business-friendly economy he possibly could. He flew around the world personally to meet with executives. He said, "Come here. We will give you stable government, rule of law, no corruption, excellent infrastructure, and a strategic location." It worked. Texas Instruments came, Hewlett-Packard came, General Electric came. Singapore moved up the value chain over decades, from basic manufacturing to petrochemicals to financial services to biotechnology. Problem 3 was housing. In 1965, most of Singapore's population lived in overcrowded slums. Lee created the Housing Development Board and set a target that seemed impossible. Within a decade, the majority would live in public housing. Singapore did not just build housing. Residents could own their flats using money from their mandatory savings program. The government solved housing and retirement savings simultaneously with one system. Problem 4 was education. Lee made English the language of instruction, which was controversial. He did it anyway because English was the language of international business, and he was building for that world. Problem 5 was defense. Singapore had no army on the day of independence. Lee turned to Israel. Israeli advisors helped build the Singapore Armed Forces from scratch. He implemented mandatory national service. 30 years after the tiers on television, Singapore's per capita income had passed the United Kingdom. 40 years after independence, it had passed the United States. From nothing to everything in 50 years, Lee ran Singapore as a dominant party state for 3 decades. Opposition politicians were sued and marginalized. The press was not free. He was paternalistic in ways that would be considered authoritarian by American standards. Lee's response was consistent. What mattered was outcomes: housing, education, healthcare, safety, economic growth, the stability that allows ordinary people to build lives and accumulate wealth. The first personal principle is constraint as clarity. Singapore's total lack of resources forced absolute clarity about what actually mattered. When you have nothing, you cannot afford to invest in things that do not produce returns. The second is the long game principle. Every major investment Lee made took 20 or 30 years to produce its full return. He was not optimizing for the next election cycle. He was building for the next generation. The third is the openness principle. Singapore chose radical openness to foreign capital and ideas when nationalism would have supported protectionism. The openness created the growth. A man cried on television because he thought his country might not survive. 50 years later, that country had a higher standard of living than the nation that expelled it. Those are not Singaporean virtues. They are human ones. Make sure you subscribe right now because Max is bringing you more stories like this one that go deep on how the world actually works and what the people who built extraordinary things understood.